Hello, romance lovers. Today I have prepared a story for you called Don't Be Carelessly Kind. Don't forget to support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. The dizzying history of the world begins from the moment when, according to rumors, a majestic god in bright clothes decided to test people, thereby creating a large magical wall. With only his hand, he created a magical barrier that forever divided the continent into two parts. But its appearance created only chaos and lawlessness, because humanity was not ready for change. Soon, people encountered terrible monsters with glowing eyes, screams, magical abilities, and large mouths, which did not allow a single person to live even a single day without being worried. They had amazing sizes, so people who were very small compared to them could not resist them, because of which the evilly smiling monsters without resistance created evil and nightmare on Earth. Many settlements were engulfed in flames as they destroyed everything in their path, also leaving the unfortunate inhabitants of villages and towns to die right on the street in terrible torment, with sadness and despair. Also, a large number of people, for a previously unknown reason, tragically disappeared inside the wall, as if the monsters did not have enough fire, and then they forced humanity to stretch out their hands in the hope of help. Tears flowed as families and couples wept and sobbed as they lost loved ones, children, and relatives, left devastated on their knees and watched as every home was reduced to ashes. But unexpectedly for everyone, one day a hero in a dark cloak appeared, who seemed to shed light on pitch darkness, promising to deal with every monster that brought trouble to mankind with a big sword. The savior had snow-white hair, purple green eyes, and a gloomy look, because in his head there were only thoughts about revenge and the destruction of monsters. And his name was Carlos Ingram. Thanks to his outstanding abilities, the knight was able not only to gather an entire army of people on horses, at the same time leading it on a large white horse, but also he defeated monsters, thereby becoming a hero. Soon it was he who founded a new empire, which also has a beautiful image of a horse on its emblem, which symbolizes the pride and courage of the people, and swords and wings were flaunted around it as a sign of freedom. Thus, the war with monsters did not end, but only acquired a new scale, because even after a century, the beautiful castle of the emperor continued to decorate the world as the property of the people. In the very Emdvorts, leaning on his arm, sat the emperor of the Kalit Empire, Carlos, who, looking at someone, ordered him to speak, also adding that if he appeared to him, then he had something to say. In front of the majestic hero stood a smiling main character named Rustic, dressed in knightly armor, because in the Kalit Empire she is a warrior of the first rank and a brilliant swordsman. After bowing to the emperor, the girl stood straight, began to tell as if she had come to him to talk, and the very topic of her conversation was incredibly serious and important, so she decided not to postpone it. Calm Carlos continued to sit on his throne, telling the girl that in this case he would listen to her, also aristocratically gesturing with his hand in her direction. When the heroine began to look at the emperor with a stern look, she imagined a war over her head, telling the hero that despite the fact that the war has been going on for hundreds of years, the number of enemies has not decreased. Remembering the sad looks of the knights who were sitting on the ground and could not do anything, Rustica also told the emperor that in the recent sortie the soldiers and even their children were defeated. His Majesty only tapped his index finger on the throne, listening to the confident words of the girl knight that all the tactics of fighting were outdated and they urgently needed new solutions to problems. There was something frightening and malicious in his manner when Carlos raised his head and, looking at the lady from top to bottom, asked what she could offer then. If only she cared about the problems and fate of the soldiers. But when the main character wanted to tell the emperor that, in her opinion, it was best to proceed to a peaceful resolution of the conflict, dark magic immediately appeared around her in the form of smoke, preventing her from speaking. A mythical dark creature with glowing eyes immediately closed the heroine's mouth when she was about to tell the hostess that it was necessary to even cross the wall for the future world. And this same creature ordered Rustica to be silent. Spirits appeared around her, and the space itself became darker and dimmer. As the girl with her mouth closed listened to the created voice telling her that her arrogance was too great if she said such things to the emperor. Sorcery caused chains to appear around the girl's neck, preventing her from even breathing air, while the spirits continued to hover around her and said that she paid for her recklessness by being left with everything. Many chains bound the lady when voices told her that now she would lose not only her rank, but also her sword skills, the trust of all those who admired her only because she spoke about peace. But suddenly the girl woke up from the nightmare. seeing a wooden window in front of her, through which she could already see the bright sun, some birds and the leaves of the trees, as if in reality everything was fine. But all the same, she inhaled sharply and eagerly and frowned, because the dream was so believable that the non-existent chains, like real ones, did not let her breathe, let alone speak. Remembering what she had dreamed, the lady moved her body a little, got tired and reluctantly, thinking that it was disgusting and unpleasant, and she would never want to return to this moment in her life. Getting up from the pillow and wiping her forehead, the girl yawned and remembered that she was in Ben's tavern, because yesterday in his behavior she drank too much beer. That's why she fell asleep right here, in the tavern. Remembering the past adventures and wondering who was next to her, the lady did not hurry to look away, where someone was also sleeping, soundlessly and very soundly, like a baby covered with a blanket. Only when she turned her head she was horrified and realized that she fell asleep with a guy unknown to her, who has short black hair, with whom, most likely, she had an interesting night. With a blush on her face, she shyly remembered all the events of the evening and night, namely, how she drank with an unknown man from Ben's tavern, where they, under the influence of strong alcohol, made love all night. The man next to her continued to sleep, when the girl lowered her head and covered her face with her hands, as if telling herself that she could not stoop so low as to do such a thing, even when she was drunk. Without thinking for a long time, Rustica decided to leave Ben's TNT, so she quickly got up and put on her clothes, while her friend continued to sleep in bed, not suspecting anything. Throwing everything that was at hand at her, she wanted to fly out of the room with bullets, so that her friend would not wake up and that she would never see him again, anywhere, because she was incredibly uncomfortable. But as soon as the girl slammed the door loudly, the man who was wrapped in a blue blanket all this time stirred slightly, because the sounds woke him up, and the sound sleep after the drunkenness did not allow him to fully wake up. The black-haired guy opened his eyes, which had a striking white color, also sighing from fatigue and adventure, with which his previous bright day with the young lady was filled. After a couple of minutes, he got up, scratching his ear and continuing to sit on the bed, feeling pain in every muscle of his large, muscular body, as if in some fighter, knight, or warrior. Raising his head, he immediately noticed that he was alone in the room, so he looked around in confusion, calling the main character by her name, slightly sad, as if loneliness upsets him a lot. In the meantime, Rustica had already advanced to her home, covering her face from the bright rays of the sun and trying to see the way, at the same time feeling very unimportant due to a strong hangover and aching muscle pain. It was as if a blue cloud of shame was hovering over the lady's head, which did not allow her to even raise her head and look people in the face, because of which she could only walk and not pay attention to others. The first to notice the unfavorable appearance of the main heroine were the women standing nearby at the counter, who, looking at the surprised Rustica, began to whisper about how untidy she is. The brown-haired woman could not stand it and turned to the gossipers, because everything around her again became darker because of unpleasant feelings. And at this time, the girls continued to talk, as if they rarely see her here, but only when she is drunk. When the ladies began to ask each other what kind of fate awaits Rustica, she herself only smiled slyly and threw her hood over herself, saying that she herself was interested in what kind of life she would have. The girl walked quickly into the thicket, into the depths of the forest, because she realized a long time ago that people would better remember her as a brilliant knight, and not as a drunkard, and therefore she would simply pretend that she did not exist. And in order to realize this, the main character decided to settle in a dark, empty forest, into which she was already walking with a confident step, because her home is located there, where no one else will be able to find her and gossip about her. After some time, she was able to reach the threshold of her house, on which she stepped with a booted foot, sighing from fatigue and talking to herself, as if she had finally found herself in her own quiet home. He opened the door. The lady was looking at her modest apartment, where there were shelves with medicines and food on the wooden walls. A bed was on the left side of the wall, a round carpet was on the floor, and a bedside table was on the right. Having taken off her upper clothes, the lady decided to go to the table and sit down on the couch in order to take the medicine as soon as possible, since her state does not promise anything good, especially after a stormy night with an unknown person. Swallowing unpleasant pills, which made Rustica's face squirm, she thought about herself and her actions, realizing that she was definitely obsessed with something, because she had never taken such risks and had such fun. Immediately after the medication, she immediately collapsed on a soft bed, which she missed very much and did not want to part with for at least 2 days in order to regain her strength and health. Burying into a pillow, she told herself in a tired voice that she should live quietly so that no one would remember her, and not go out to bars and drink beer with strangers, then sleep with them and run away. Already falling asleep, the lady repeated the rules to herself, for example, such as not to talk to strangers and not to trust strangers, not to get drunk to the point of losing consciousness. But gradually she fell asleep. Her thoughts, like foggy, black smoke, dispersed through her consciousness, because now she was thinking only about the bad version of herself. They say she does all kinds of stupid things every now and then, for which she is ashamed. But the girl's fatigue seemed to be lifted by the hand when she jumped up from the sudden realization that something loud was happening on the wooded street, and she also felt a strange sensation of blood near the house. Frowning, she looked out the window for a moment, wondering for a moment what kind of energy she was feeling, because her magic allows her to feel the presence of danger, including wild animals. Rustica immediately grabbed her sword in order to deal with everything and see with her own eyes who was the owner of such a strong, unusual energy, which she suddenly felt at home. The fearless main character ran outside in her home clothes, armed only with a sword, while already holding it in both hands in case an unforeseen, terrible event happens. As she expected, she smelled a strong smell of blood on the street, following which she went deep into the forest, not weakening her vigilance, sense, vision, and reaction due to a possible attack of a wild animal. When the smell of death led her to the right place and ended, she hid behind a tree, preferring to remain secretive so that only one eye would look at the epicenter of strange night events. She did so, quickly stuck her head out from behind a tree post and angrily, looking ahead with a strained gaze, trying to see something in the darkness of the night where only the moonlight shines. What the lady saw made her amazed, because under some tree she saw the silhouette of a man, and next to him lay a dead bear with an open mouth and red eyes, as if possessed by magic. The main character was even more surprised when she saw next to the second bear the same predator with red eyes, which also no longer lived because it stuck out its tongue in exhaustion, lying on the grass. The girl once again looked at the one who could single-handedly knock down two whole healthy animals, and thanks to the moon's rays, she realized that the guy was suspiciously familiar, with black hair and a large body. Rustica decided to get out from behind the tree, realizing that nothing else was dangerous, but when she approached the man, he stirred and, with his head down, covered in blood, asked who she was. But as soon as the guy raised his head, the already stunned main character looked at him with great shock, because she recognized him as the one with whom she had previously spent a stormy night, and with whom she drank alcohol. The bloody guy with black hair and white eyes looked at Rustica and cried, constantly asking why she left him alone and simply left the room early in the morning without saying goodbye. Letty decided to remain calm, so she just clenched her free hand into a fist and continued to look at him with anger, not understanding how he came from the small town and the runaway itself here, in the middle of the forest. Anger awakened in her when she again imagined blackness around her, because looking at the whole situation, she guesses that most likely he was following her and was only pretending to be a crybaby. The brunette wanted to get up from the ground and approach Rustica, but she immediately put a sword to his throat, forcing him not to move and ordering him to immediately tell about himself and how he got here. The crying man continued to cry when he got up from the ground and told the lady that she should remember him from his childhood, because when he was little, she gave him bread so that he would not be hungry and sad. But Rustica just got mad, brandishing her sword and telling the guy that of course she wouldn't remember him just by one memory, because she was kind not only to him, but to many people in her life. Hearing the heroine's words, the white-eyed, handsome man only lowered his gaze and again sadly told his girlfriend that this was already too much for him, because then it seemed to him that she was kind and friendly only to him. The brown-haired woman looked at the brunette with incomprehension, because he began to cry even more when he asked if someone from her received not only bread, but also chocolate or sleep with her in the tent. Then the man with the wounds came closer to the slightly frightened girl, telling her that this is more important to him than any wounds, so he wants to find out as soon as possible if she really does not remember him, or if she is just pretending. The shocked main character looked at the ground because thoughts were literally bubbling in her head. But when the stranger repeated that they had seen each other in childhood, it seems that she remembered something. She remembered that far back in her childhood, she met a white-haired boy with the same light eyes, where they met a glance near the wall, when both were soldiers or warriors of the Empire. The lonely guy, covered in blood and in hunting clothes, continued to look at the lady with a sad look and asked her why she didn't remember him, and for what reason she left him alone in that tavern. He even extended his bloody hand to her, saying that he had come such a long way not so that now she would not remember him or reject him, so he asks her to remember him at least on this day. The man put his palm to the girl's face, telling her that he was asking for forgiveness for the fact that perhaps he was inexperienced on their first night, since it was his first time. But the heroine only asked him to stop fooling around and carrying nonsense, while sobbing like a little boy. But he no longer heard Rustika's words, because the only thing he wanted was a hug, which he did, leaning over the main character and covering her body with his big, pumped-up back. Rustica also confusedly and fearfully embraced him, but she looked at him with slight disgust, not understanding what to do with the wounded man in the forest now and how to drag him home to heal his wounds. The couple continued to embrace strangely among the trees and in the night fog. While in complete silence, the heroine of the story realized that she had fallen into a much bigger problem than she had previously imagined. Somehow, after a few hours, the guy still ended up at the lady's house, because she was able to drag him here, while making him lie down in bed and not move, in order to calmly bandage the wounds and treat them. The girl looked with contempt at the face of the sleeping boy, wiping her hands with a towel and thinking that if he was an ordinary person, he would have died long ago from the wound. But he could even stand up in front of her. Having finished the treatment, she took a basin of water with her hands, which was already soaked with blood, in order to get rid of it and do other things while the stranger was sleeping on her bed. Wringing the rag from moisture and red spots, she began to think that if they met on the wall, it means that she was still a knight then, and therefore she was somewhere 17 or 18. Although many years have passed since that moment, she can still remember his face and appearance, which always stood out against the background of other boys, was bright because of his blonde hair and white eyes. Remembering all this, the heroine of the story looked to the side and assumed that he got a lot of attention because of his bright image, so it is not surprising that she could communicate with him, marveling at his beauty. She wanted to wring out the wet cloth one more time, so she raised it above her pelvis. But when one small thought crossed her mind, she froze like a statue. Realizing that if she was an adult then, and he was only a boy at the time of their meeting, Rustica asked herself with horror on her face, what is the difference in their ages that she remembers him as a child? With an outraged and shocked face, she continued to wipe the cloth from the blood, trying not to even think about the fact that so many events and troubles could happen to her in one day. But she did not even suspect that behind her, being on the bed, an unknown person was already getting up, looking only at her and what she was diligently doing. The guy uttered Rustica's name once, and that was enough for the lady, who was dissatisfied with everything, to turn to him with such a face as if she didn't like anything and everything in this situation. However, when she looked at the wounded man smiling at her, she realized that he has an indescribable natural beauty, because his hair always lies beautifully on his head, and his eyes shine like beads. Rustica even stopped breathing, looking at a guy she didn't know and realizing that few people could resist such beauty. So she looked at him with aesthetic pleasure, a slight smile. But in spite of everything, she had to keep a cool head because she suspects that he might turn out to be a spy for the Emperor. So she immediately crossed her arms and told him to go if he already felt so good that he was smiling. The smiling guy continued to smile at the heroine, saying that even when she behaves so heartlessly, he is still very grateful to her for saving him and curing him of his ailments. The girl was very surprised by the fact that the nameless brunette cheerfully got out of bed and began to inspect her house, sharing his impressions. But the heroine immediately asked if his leg was broken along with his ribs. Approaching him even closer, the lady continued to keep her arms crossed, suspiciously looking into his eyes and asking who he was and who sent him here. But he only pointed at himself. Rustica explained that he is a real psycho, because no one will go against two bears with one sword. Because of this, the girl immediately remembered two dead animals that she saw in the forest. But the brunette didn't answer any of the lady's questions, because he wanted to take her hands in his and say that now it's not important, because now they're together. And that's in the first place for him. He continued to hold Rustica's hand affectionately, saying with a smile that he was so upset by her departure that now he does not even think of leaving her from this house, so that now he will always be with her. Rustica immediately removed her hand from the guy and looked away, said that their last night was just a mistake, so he should leave here and never meet her again. But when she again noticed that her words made the big and tall, strong guy cry like a little boy, she got even more angry, asking directly what was happening to him and who he was. The crying brunette once again told the lady that their last night was not a mistake for him, because he likes her very much. And now, according to him, he cannot tolerate her anger and irritation. Then the heroine told him to stop crying, because she remembers him well. But when he heard this, the man only leaned towards her, asking what his name was then. And when the brown-haired girl could not answer, he said that she was lying. Continuing to look into Rustica's eyes, the white-eyed boy tearfully told her that his name was Hayden Constant, after which he once again desperately asked if she remembered him or had forgotten. Sighing, the brunette got up and said that in that case, they would not be in a hurry to get acquainted, after which he asked if she had heard anything about the neighboring empire of Prisay, to which the heroine answered in the negative. Hayden immediately asked the lady how long she had lived here, and she was embarrassed by this, but the smiling Rustica answered that she had been living here for 4 years, as if she was shy of her words. Hearing this, the guy got upset, said how she couldn't help but go somewhere after their last meeting, but the protagonist seemed to fend off his questions, saying that there was nothing unusual about it. He continued to look at the brown-haired girl as if she were already his girlfriend, also saying that if she likes it here so much, then he will move here to live. And the astonished Rustica only asked him about it. The heroine grabbed her head, which was already burning from the guy's words that he must take responsibility for what happened, so he will not leave her so easily, having spent one night with her before that. Having decided to put everything in its place, Rustica closed her eyes and with a clever look showed him her index finger, said that she already remembered seeing him as a blonde, and to this the guy said that his hair turned black because of crossing the gate. But the green-eyed lady was interested in the man's words, so she looked at him with a puzzled look, asking how it was possible and what he meant. Expecting the usual answer, the heroine did not think that the mysterious Hayden would appear to her as sinister when he said that the wall had been breached a long time ago, and she should be the first to know about it. Hayden's look became even more serious when he, without blinking, continued to look at his friend and maliciously tells her that now the Kalat Empire is not the only one, because another one has appeared on the other side. The words of Hayden, who appeared out of nowhere, alarmed the silent brown-haired girl, so she did not say anything, but only stared at him with an uncomprehending, shocked, excited look. The next day, when the heroine gathered herself and put on her usual cape, went to the market for food, she walked along the road past people and could not stop thinking about the broken wall that protects everyone. Pausing near the cheese counter, she touched the bags of goods and thought that the wall was magical, created by nature itself, and no one could break it, let alone destroy it. She was putting the bags in her basket, looking at them and realizing that thanks to the experience she got from fighting near the wall, she knows that neither magic nor force will destroy her. But at that moment, the seller called her. The grandfather with the gray beard and kind eyes looked at the heroine, and the first thing he did was ask her if she was from the Kalat Empire, to which the brown-haired beauty replied that she was from there. She was surprised that even the cheese seller told her that it means that she knows a lot about the wall, and then the astonished lady asked what he meant. He showed the girl his index finger. The grandfather told the protagonist that the merchant who passed by him recently said that the wall was broken, but he considers it only a joke and nonsense. Rustica also began to laugh playfully when the old man said that in that conversation with the merchant, he had joked about Ben's tavern, saying that he should drink less there. But in fact, the heroine was not funny. After that, the heroine said a sweet goodbye to the merchant and waved to him, getting ready to leave, walking with moderate steps along the street with counters and all kinds of products. But as soon as she turned around, she made her face more serious, looking away and not stopping to think that more and more people are talking about the damaged wall. And most likely, it is true. Finding herself completely alone with her thoughts and feelings, the beautiful woman in a cape only bowed her head and sadly tried to imagine what war would be like then, if everything was so bad. And Hayden, meanwhile, was sitting in the house of the main character, also looking away, but thinking only about her. More precisely, about why she still didn't remember anything. He sat on a chair and went through one thought after another, not understanding what that ugly emperor named Carlos had done to her, that now he does not recognize her. And after all, he had been waiting for a long time to meet her. When the patch was on his face, he raised his hands to his face and said with a smile that it was good for him that he was wounded by a bear, because thanks to this, he could stay longer with Rustica. The man would have continued to think about his companion if a white bird with a paper in its beak had not flown into the window of the heroine's house, to which Hayden immediately paid attention, raised his head, and looked at him with white eyes. A white-feathered falcon landed on Hayden's hand as if he were his master, while the boy himself smiled slyly and talked with the messenger, as if he was already worried that she would not fly to him, would get lost. He began to calmly read the letter that the bird brought, talking to her aloud as if he understood. Carlos does not yet understand that people will begin to pass through the hole in the wall, which means that changes are coming. Having fulfilled all that was required, Hayden waved his hand, thereby allowing the bird to take off again into the air and fly out through the window, leaving behind feathers and when the hero himself accompanied her with his gaze. Immediately after that, with the words that now is not the time to think about such a fool as Emperor Coletta, Hayden went to bed to cover himself with a blanket and continue to think only about the heroine of the story. He did not have to wait long, because the protagonist appeared on the doorstep of his house almost immediately when Hayden went to bed, when he thought that she was not a simple girl, but one who was used and taken away for selfish purposes. The guy saw Rustica's face at the moment when clear and pleasant feelings for her reigned in his heart again, and he continued to think that she was not just a drunkard, but a hero for everyone and his savior. As usual, Hayden looked at the girl and gave her his smile, greeted her with the words that he was incredibly glad that she finally came home and didn't leave him alone. After walking around the market, the lady decided to check Hayden's health, so she sat down on a chair next to him and began to examine the wounds, realizing with surprise that his bones had grown together very quickly. The wounds had healed. But every time she starts to suspect Hayden that he is spying on her, he only smiles and answers that his wounds really healed very quickly. But it's not surprising for him. Rustica was wrapping his arm with a bandage when the boy leaned towards her with a smile and said that if he was about to recover, he would help her chop wood, and that he was not afraid of work. The words of the little-known man made Rustica sigh tiredly and disappointed, because she really wanted him to leave. And now she will have to endure his presence. Think how to get rid of him. Having finished treating Hayden, the girl knelt down near the burning fireplace so that all the used bandages soaked in blood were sitting in it. But even at this moment, she suspected that not everything was so simple. One by one, she threw bandages into the fire, looking at the burning and thinking that his recovery speed was like that of the Emperor's knights. But he said that he was not one, but only crossed the wall, which was strange. But suddenly the lady remembered that she had recently put the soup to boil, which she had completely forgotten about. So she shuddered, shouting about it. But at that time, Hayden was already preparing it behind her, saying that everything was fine. Approaching Hayden closer and looking at the elegantly laid table of various dishes, the lady asked the guy if he did not live alone, but he only replied with a smile that he did not live alone, but with her. Suspecting the guy of espionage, the girl nevertheless sat down to eat with him, while Hayden said that he added a little salt to the dishes, trying not to overdo it, and Rustica replied that everything was very tasty. Holding a fork with a piece of food near her mouth, she, with lowered eyes, thought about the fact that even before she could not think that she lives alone, although now she sees that there was no one in her life. But as soon as the heroine remembered that there was not just an acquaintance sitting opposite her, but a possible spy, she looked at him with a furious look. But at this time, Hayden himself turned to the door, said that he heard a knock. Rustica decided to go out the door first, and when she opened it, she immediately saw on the threshold a familiar village boy, to whom she had recently given the skins of killed bears for sale. The white-haired boy continued to stand and tells the heroine that his master really liked the skins, and he knows that the one who caught them got a lot. That's why he offers a good price for them. Pointing back, the blonde with a short beard informed the lady that now she should go with him, as the master will pay her right away, to which the heroine agreed, getting ready to take the cape with her. Hayden appeared on the threshold, waving his hand in farewell to the lady, who was already following the guy with a quick step, turning to the brunette and telling him that he would be back soon, so he shouldn't be bored. After some time, the girl found herself in front of the master himself, a rich man with a gray beard and hair, who handed her a bag of coins and said that these were money for the skins of big bears. The main character immediately took the bag in her hands and with a smile, with joy on her face, said words of gratitude to the hostess, also saying to him that she would now count them before going home with the wealth. The brown-haired woman continued to stand near the man sitting at the table. They choose to open the bag, also answering the master's question about her life. They say she has lived here for quite a long time. 4 years, to be exact. Starting to count each coin out loud, the lady did not suspect that the master himself would ask her about the one that had crashed into the wall, whether she had heard rumors about its damage, unreliability, and possible danger. The girl's eyes widened in surprise when she heard about the wall from the old man, because she continued to believe that these were just rumors. But every time she realized that she was wrong. The upset lady looked at the man and asked him if he was joking or not mocking her, but he just shook his head and replied with a serious face that there was no reason to laugh, because this is verified information, which almost every dog in the Empire already knows. Rustica could not answer anything because she lowered her head and looked at something with an angry look, realizing with sadness that these news foreshadowed a possible new war. But everything was still strange. Letty remembered that she had also heard rumors that a certain king of monsters had appeared, possessing incredible strength, but even greater beauty, which is why she imagined him in a villainous form, in dark clothes. The girl's thoughts went too far, because when she began to remember that according to rumors, the king of monsters has incredible beauty and he most resembles Hayden, she introduced him. Bad thoughts forced her to act, so she immediately decided to walk to her house along the forest path, waving her arms and thinking that if all this was true, she wanted to see everything for herself, to make sure. Making the decision to move to the northern wall, the lady realized with a frightened, stern look that she could meet her friends there. And she really didn't want that, because she was ashamed of her misdeeds in life and her lost reputation. The heroine of the story perfectly remembers how everyone laughed at her because of the loss of the title. So even at this moment, when she walks through the forest, she imagined a bunch of smiling faces around her, laughing at her. Rustica could only lower her head and close her eyes, asking herself if she could change something this time, or at least endure the new adventures she hates so much. But Madame's sad thoughts about the worst scenarios were interrupted by the sweet voice of a man, which she heard in front of her, and because of which she suddenly raised her head with a surprised look and slightly open lips. Looking at someone among several trees, the lady realized that it was Hayden sitting on a stump and looking at her, as if he had been waiting for her arrival all this time not in the house, but on the street. Approaching the guy closer, the brown-haired girl with green eyes immediately asked the man what he had forgotten here. But he continued to sit and look at her with a smile, answering that he had decided to wait for her. Getting up, Hayden, wanting to show his kindness, politeness, held out the girl's hand and with a smile told her to give him something heavy if it was difficult for her to carry anything. But in response, Rustica only understood the hand with a fake smile and answered that there was nothing in her hands anyway, which made Hayden feel ashamed of himself. He muttered that it was too awkward. Instead, the heroine decided to show her friend a bag of money, looking at it and saying that she got so many coins thanks to the skins of the bears, and with this amount she could go somewhere right now. Hayden kept smiling, answering Rustica, saying that she made the right decision when she wanted to leave here, but she immediately told him that she was not going to leave her home forever. When a warm wind played around the couple, which made the leaves rise to the sky, and the main heroine's long hair fluttered in the air, she told the guy without regret that this money was not for her, but so that he would leave her far away forever. Then the smile disappeared from Hayden's face, and he, like a dark cloud, began to look at her with emptiness and sadness. But Rustica still could not understand who he was and why he appeared, that he needed her. The green-eyed lady also looked at him in silence, trying to guess whether the Emperor had sent this mysterious person to watch over her, or if he was somehow connected to the broken wall. Unable to stand both words, Hayden came closer to the heroine and, stretching out his hand to her face, looked into her eyes and desperately asked why she was so irresponsible, cold and callous to him. He bowed his head to her, constantly asking if she had done something wrong that night. But Rustica just moved away from him and waved her hand, saying that everything was wrong and it was no longer important to her. Saddened, Hayden got up and asked the lady what she would do if they ever met or saw each other again. The main character, indifferent to the guy, replied that this, most likely, will not happen. But if he does recognize her and they meet, let him pretend that he does not know her and they have never met. He did not react to the lady's words in any way, as if he understood her or accepted the terms of the contract, because he raised his fist to his face, cleared his throat, smiling sweetly before saying something important. Suddenly leaning towards the young main character and not taking her by the forearm, he leaned towards her face and said that if she wanted it that way, he would disappear from her life right at this moment. Immediately after this, the surprised Rustica watched as the guy with a handsome face and body gradually dissolved into small petals in the air, continuing to smile at the lady and telling her to take care of herself. The green-eyed beauty could only watch the miracle with wide-open eyes, when charming, light-emitting leaves were already flying around her, and she herself watched the disappearance of Hayden, who also told her that they would meet again soon. As a result, she was left completely alone, as if the guy next to her did not exist, and for a long time Rustica could not believe what was happening, continuing to hold one of the leaves in her palm. Already at home, she just sat down at the table and, putting her elbows on it with a frown, began to think about this whole situation, realizing only that everything was too confusing and complicated, very suspicious. She continued to sit at the table and remember that even when she entered the house, she did not see Hayden in it, as if he was not there, and as if she had never met a strange, very handsome and strong guy. Bending his head to the side, the girl looked at something and realized that he was an incredibly strong magician, if he could move his body with such ease. But she did not understand why he needed her. The girl grabbed her head again because constant speculations, conjectures, secrets, and suspicions made her wake up a lot. But at least now she won't be angry because of his presence in the house. She decided to put her head on the table because she had already gotten tired, also saying to herself that she was finally listening to the long-awaited silence, which she had dreamed of for so long. But even this time, Rustica did not manage to lie down and rest because she was prevented from getting up from the table by sounds outside the house, namely footsteps coming from outside the door, which made her feel uneasy. The lady was even more surprised when unusual noises were heard outside the door, and the loud voice of a soldier who ordered her to go out and take orders from the emperor, because she is a knight of the Khalid Empire. Frightened and not understanding anything, the lady immediately hurried to leave the house, so she quickly opened the door with fear on her face, holding a cape in her other hand and looking at the neatly dressed knight. Surprised by everything, the lady looked at the man with her olive eyes, repeating the same question about who he was and why he came, although everything was clear to her from the first time, and in fact, she asked him again in order to be sure of her guesses. But in front of her, the girl saw not an ordinary soldier or warrior Khalid, but an old acquaintance named Aldwin Rochester, who looked at his friend and smiled, because he was glad to see her in good health. Smiling even wider, the guy with short brown hair handed the heroine a package with a red ribbon, explaining that it was good news for her that the emperor had called her to him. However, the protagonist of the story was not going to immediately follow the orders of the one who had previously destroyed her career with a reputation. So she immediately entered the house and drank a bottle of alcohol in one gulp, trying to drink away the stress. He knocked the glass bottle on the table. The girl looked at the man with fury and said loudly, with firm intentions, that she would not go anywhere. That's why even the room became darker, like a thief's cave. Eldwin wasn't going to leave so easily, so he held out his hand to the girl, trying to calm her down. But he seemed to see the heat of anger coming from Rusty, and she once again told him that it would be better to die of drunkenness than to go to him. In front of her lay the emperor's decree, which stated that he himself ordered Countess Rustica Jeans to be sent to another empire, Prisia, as a diplomat to represent the interests of the Khalid Empire. The girl's face continued to be angry because she needed not only to go to the hated, white-haired emperor, but also to cross the wall and represent her empire in someone else's. Rustica's anger was so great that it seemed as if fire was coming from her, which could have burned Aldwin himself, and she continued to knock on the table and think that Carlos was definitely mocking her. The smiling man once again tried to calm the girl with words, saying that she does not need to lose her excellent talent in martial arts and exchange it for eternal drunkenness and life in the shadows. But the man immediately closed the snake with the Ulvbaka, when the brown-haired girl only showed him the contract and said that the peace between the empires was meaningless, because they had been destroying their people with monsters for a long time. Then Eldwin decided to explain to the lady that now it seems that the neighboring empire wants peace and everything is not so bad. As she thinks, but Rustica just drank another bottle of beer, ignoring the words of the warrior. She would have drunk her beer without trouble if Aldwin had not told her at her hand that he asked to go to another empire with her, because of which she spat the alcohol out of her mouth in shock. Rustica immediately pointed her finger at the guy and became indignant, saying that he was not needed there, but Eldwin said that the diplomat should also have security, so he would go with her despite everything. The lady desperately and sadly tried to explain to an old friend that there is no doubt that the Empire of Prese is a barbaric country, full of monsters, and they will eat them at will and leave no bones. But Eldvin insisted on his own, because he gently took the heroine's hand in his and once again said with a smile that everything is not as scary and dangerous as she thinks, so she should not worry about it. The lady was even more surprised by the words of the knight, who continued to smile at the protagonist and look at her with sweet eyes, explaining that the emperor knew perfectly well where she was and that he was very much waiting for her to appear. But the girl looked at the boy and did not believe his words, but noticed only that Eldwin had become very loyal to the emperor, and this is evident. And she was also surprised that she herself had been like that before, loyal and submissive. The couple continued to talk in Rustica's house, and Eldwin persuaded his friend to agree to the trip, referring to the fact that she had always dreamed of visiting the wall, and this was a great opportunity for her. And after some time, the heroine still got herself together in order to move forward, when a knight stood behind her, and when she thought that she would die alone and have nothing to lose. Noticing that his old friend had gathered quickly enough, Eldvin told her about it, said that in 4 years she had not so many things. And she, taking a bag with her, replied that she lived in such a way that she would leave at any time this is the place to take only what is necessary. The couple left the house and the guy closed the door behind him, asking Rustica if she plans to return here, but she said that she would return only if it worked out, because there are many changes in her life. Conversations about the house made her turn around and, with a sad look and slightly open lips, perhaps for the last time to see her modest hut, which gave her peace from society and ridicule. Her house is small, but Rustica didn't need a lot to live in comfort, so she continued to look at the wooden structure with longing, which Eldvin also did. He threw a hood over himself. The brown-haired girl looked at the guy and said that the journey would likely be long. Then he immediately took out a strange blue stone from his pocket, showing it to the girl. Pointing to the strange mineral with his finger, Eldwin happily told the heroine that the emperor had given it to him in order to instantly move to the palace, so their journey would be short. At that moment, when the stone of extraordinary beauty began to emit a magical light, Eldwin told the lady to hold on to it, which Rustica did, holding his wrist with his hand and preparing to plunge into magic. One touch of the main heroine caused a bright light to appear in the middle of the forest, which means that the magic of movement has already begun, and in the next moment they will be in a completely different place. Ruska was incredibly surprised at the movement, which was visible on her face when she looked with amazed eyes at what was located very close to the palace, and while Eldwin looked at her and sighed smilingly. The main character looked at a magical dark hole emitting a violet color, realizing that this is the very breach that everyone is talking about, and because of which she ended up here. Although the entrance to the Second Empire was far from the heroine, she continued to look at it and was surprised, because now all her guesses turned out to be true, and her quiet, carefree life, unfortunately or fortunately, came to an end. It seems that Rustica was not very happy that Elvin would immediately talk about the Emperor when he went further through the palace, next to which there is a breach, saying that Carlos already felt sorry for her. Without delay, the knight and the last knight of the first rank were already in front of the door, behind which was the hall with the throne of the emperor and himself, while outside his room was guarded by 2 guards in armor. One of them immediately understood why the lady and the man were here. So he hastened to open the high doors, looking at the guests and telling them that the emperor was already sitting in the room and waiting for their visit. Having found himself in the emperor's chambers, Eldvin immediately bowed to his mistress, and the calm main character decided to take off her hood, because it is unethical to be in a headdress in the room. She never thought that she would again see the hated white-haired emperor on the throne, who would again give her orders with a haughty look, without thinking about the opinion of others. But all this was not a dream, because the emperor himself was the first to greet the heroine, looked at her with a terrible look of green eyes and said that he never thought that she would agree to visit him. Rustica immediately bowed to his majesty, saying that she was glad to see him in good health, although in fact she thought that even though the emperor was already 400 years old, he did not age at all. He looked very young. In a large room with high windows, Emperor Carlos first asked the lady if Eldwin had told her about everything, and Rustica replied monotonously that everything was like that, and she learned everything the hard way. The white-haired master looked at the heroine with a smile, said that he had never faced a similar situation, so he thinks that everything should be resolved diplomatically, avoiding casualties. The brown-haired girl with green eyes only looked at the king, who continues to speak, saying that he knows very well how she likes peace and quiet. But now, according to him, they must be on their guard, since they have no idea what is hidden behind the wall and what it looks like the very empire of Presse. But the lady frowned and thought when she heard from the emperor that they should talk to the empire about the missing people, so Rustica realized that only now the emperor was worried about them. Gesturing with his hand, the emperor continued to look at the lady, ordering her to find out how monsters are created, and not to forget to constantly send him reports with the most important information. A modest lady in a dark cape asked Carlos if someone would be waiting for them on the other side of the wall, to which the emperor replied that the Presse delegation was already waiting for them, and they needed to hurry immediately. But when Rustica asked His Majesty what kind of reward awaits her for the work done, she only heard that he would do a lot for her, which only angered the girl, while others laughed behind her. Realizing that she was not going anywhere, the lady bowed low to the heroine of humanity and promised that she would do everything possible for him, everything that was only in her power. But in fact, she looked at the emperor with contempt, because she realized that he knew from the beginning that she would not be able to refuse, since her parents also disappeared behind the wall many years ago. Without wasting time, the servants quickly prepared the end and all the equipment for the delegation, next to which were already standing the heroes who are going to solemnly cross the wall and get acquainted with the other world. The team turned out to be modest, but at its head was the main character herself, dressed in chic red clothes, who is a brilliant swordsman, deprived of his strength and attention. Also in the team, there is a smiling Eldvin, who is the bodyguard of the main heroine in the expedition, and a knight of the Imperial Order, has honor and some power. In addition to Eldwin, there is also a second escort in the team, a dark-haired girl with black hair named Eliza, and behind her is one servant who is sent to manage the household. Rustica immediately paid attention to the lady with the long black fork, realizing that the Emperor could make her a spy, and she no longer holds a grudge against Eldvin, since he himself offered to go with her. Deciding to be polite, the heroine of the story in red approached Eliza and looked at her with a smile, said that they had not seen each other for a long time, but she turned out to be less friendly, only agreeing with her colleague. Looking into the stern eyes of the lady, Rustica remembered that Eliza is also a knight of the Emperor, and she perfectly remembers her skills in wielding a sword, so she is almost sure that she is her killer. The heroine also decided to pay attention to the servant, turning to him and asking what his name was, to which the blonde replied that his name was Maiden. Looking carefully into his gray eyes with golden hair, Rustica realized that she had seen this servant next to the Emperor before, which means that he is close to him, and it is quite likely that he is also a spy. She remembered the anger of the Imperator, his long hair and greatness, continuing to imagine him with a glowing green eye, and thinking that on this trip she would be surrounded by Carlos's people from all sides. Under the Emperor, he imagined Eldvin, Eliza, and Matin. The main character of the event laughed, saying that they are wholeheartedly devoted to the Emperor, which means that they are ready to carry out all his orders, even if they are cruel. Rustica fell silent because she again felt a dark aura around her, which did not portend anything good, because she left the house in one day and was surrounded by possible spies, because of which she will not be able to relax for a second. But it was already necessary to advance, so the main character quickly sat on a white horse, turned back and looked at the servant, who loudly said that all the preparations were completed and it was necessary to go. Taking the reins in her hands, the girl looked at the road ahead with a stern look and told everyone that since everything was ready, they would start moving right now. Not for a second. Immediately after this, the main character forced her window to jump in the direction of an ominous, magical hole, which emitted not only a black-violet color, but also a majestic, unknown aura. A team consisting of 4 people rode on horses to the majestic gate, where 2 lines of soldiers had already lined up to guide them on the way, where they would be met by other people. The main character noticed the presence of many knights in shining armor. That's why she paid attention to them, threw a suspicious look at each of them, which Eldwin did behind her. He decided to make a joke, looked at everyone and said with a smile that they were going to that world, not an expedition to a foreign empire. The first to react to Eldwin's cheerful mood was the main character, who turned to him and asked if he was ready or afraid. But he only said that he was going there for a good life. Gesturing with his hand, the guy once again said with a smile to Rustica that nobody is going to cut their throats, so he doesn't worry, and also doesn't advise her to shake in fear, as if there are only monsters there. The main character only smiled, said that she would listen to his words, but Eldvin continued to jump on his horse behind her, saying that everything would be fine because they offered them a truce not for the purpose of murder. They both continued to gallop slowly on their horses towards the breach as they talked about the possibility that this was the plan of Prese's empire, also thinking that the Emperor would have guessed about it at once. Hearing Eldvin's words, the heroine smiled playfully, looking into the distance because she saw that the Emperor was literally the center of the universe for him, and he would go anywhere if only he told him. But she was getting closer and closer to the wall with the hole, and when she got very close to it, she made the white horse stop, not ceasing to look at the miracle of nature, damaged by the unknown. The girl seemed to be next to the starry sky, but in fact it was a part of a dark gap in the wall, behind which was another empire, into which they had to enter as diplomats. The smile disappeared on the heroine's face because excitement arose in her, and Eldvin looked at the gap and smiled, telling the heroine that, in theory, they just need to go inside, as they told him earlier. Realizing that now there was no way back, the girl resolutely looked at the wall and made the horse run straight at her, thinking that she would at least be glad to know what was beyond it. But the determined lady herself did not notice how quickly she found herself on the other side of the wall, looking at the extraordinary landscape with amazement, when her guard and partner passed through the hole next to her. The main character was very surprised for the reason that she did not see monsters, destruction, or death in front of her, but a quite nice bridge behind which cities and various buildings could be seen. All four horsemen stopped when they noticed unusual, slightly different structures, so they all did not hurry to get off their horses or look for the owners of the Presse Empire with their eyes. Eldvin, being a smiling guy, covered his head with his hand from the rays and began to look at the strange garden, saying that it was all amazing. But Eliza was not so cheerful, because she thought that it was all an illusion and a deception. Rustica raised her hand and told Eldwin to shut up immediately, because in front of her she saw those who were already waiting for their appearance and were prepared for the guests from the other side of the wall. The first thing she noticed was an aristocrat with a monocle, who was also looking at her, and behind him stood several knights guarding one imperial carriage on which they would go to the emperor. The main character immediately got off the horse and approached the man, introducing himself, after which he himself called himself Simon, said that he was a count sent by the emperor of the Presse Empire. After counting all those present, Simon pointed to the carriage with a monocle and said that this transport was specially for them, so that they could comfortably get to the palace and meet His Majesty. After some time, the main character was already sitting in the carriage and looked a little sadly out of the window, thinking that this place was much brighter and nicer than she had previously imagined in her mind. She observed a peaceful life in a foreign empire, where there were the same kind, hard-working people, cozy houses, and streets decorated with greenery. And because of all this, she had mixed feelings. It turns out that Simon was also sitting next to the heroines all the time, who noticed Rustica's silence and therefore told her that their emperor really wanted to meet with them and hold a diplomatic conversation. Continuing to look out the window, behind which the horizons in the luxurious palace opened, she listened to Simon, who told that now they were in a fortress city, their capital called Shalea. The main character watched her second life in another city with sadness and various thoughts, not even suspecting that it was not an ordinary bird flying over her, but a faithful mentor of her friend. After some time, the delegation of the Khalid Empire was able to reach the palace, snow-white and majestic, with high windows and ornaments, where their journey ended. Two black horses stopped galloping on command, stopping right near the entrance to the palace for the main character to get out of the carriage, followed by her mentors. While Rustica marveled at the incredible architecture of the palace, which looked as if the gods lived in it, Simon indicated with his hand exactly where they needed to go in order to appear before the emperor. The girl continued to observe the ornaments and columns in the corridors of the castle, realizing that even in her empire, the palace has its own luxury. But it was this one that surprised her from the very beginning, and the friends remained on the street, while she herself followed Simon, who met a maid on his way, saying that they should go here, because the emperor was already waiting for them. As soon as the servant opened the door inside the luxurious hall, the main character saw a round table with some guests, and above them, on the steps, towered the emperor himself in a dark cloak, looking out the window. Rustica immediately drew attention to the dark figure on which the sun was falling and whose clothes were blowing in the wind, because something in his image was familiar to her, as if she had already seen him before. When the emperor sensed and heard the presence of the guest, he spoke with a smile, saying that he was extremely happy about the presence of the main heroine in such a place, especially since before there was enmity between the countries. And when His Majesty turned around, Rustica realized with horror that the emperor of her neighboring empire was none other than Hayden himself, who now, dressed in an elegant outfit, smiled at her as if he had never seen her before. But deep down, he was hiding his joy and anticipation. After carefully looking at the emperor's face, Rustica was once again convinced that he was awake and that this was reality, where the guy with whom she had spent the night by mistake is the ruler of the country of monsters. Unimaginable surprise appeared on her face, and she did not know what to say when Hayden greeted her, because she could not believe that he was crying and was the emperor. But she had no choice but to accept the benevolence of the ruler and pretend that she did not know him, politely sipping tea and thinking that it was all a fantasy, because there are so many coincidences in life. With a frown on her face, the heroine mistakenly convinced herself more and more that her end was near. If the emperor was staring at her in her native house and here, but at this time Hayden himself looked at her and shouted. Remembering that he is a diplomat, the lady put down a cup and with a smile told everyone that her emperor definitely also wants peace and well-being, so they can easily agree on further cooperation. But also the Emperor Prisia was interested in Rustica herself, so he looked at the sheet with her information and, speaking to the lady, it is said that it is written here that she is a master of magic and is a knight. Looking at the girl with white eyes, the sage warned that magic is prohibited in his empire, and they can use it only with permission, which he demands to remember constantly. Rustica smiled sweetly and nodded at all Hayden's words, although in fact she was very angry with him, because she knows that he is mocking her, knowing that she is powerless both in magic and in the physical plane. But suddenly the main character raised her head in surprise, as the thought flashed in her head that perhaps there is a person like Hayden in her empire, and she is only scared and mistaken. The heroine thought about this for the reason that Hayden, whom she remembered earlier, was a smiling, harmless, and very vulnerable man who constantly surprised and delighted her. But now she seems to see not Hayden, but a more serious version of him, because he doesn't even smile when he looks at her, which makes him even more different from the guy Rustica saw earlier. She wanted to continue thinking about the possible probability that Hayden has different personalities. But suddenly the Emperor himself spoke about how it was difficult for them to cross the wall when he himself signed the paper. Looking at the heroine of the story with a mocking smile, the guy with cunning eyes said that he is very glad to see them in his possessions, but warns that you have to be careful here, except with alcohol. With these words, the man handed Rustica a treaty about a possible peace and cooperation with the Caleta Empire, which would have a positive effect on the relations of the former warring countries. Immediately after that, he stood up, since the most important thing in the interview had already passed, and it was time to finish the reception, which already lasted longer than many expected. When the main character got up in the same way to say goodbye to the Emperor, he mockingly walked past her, looking at her with a smile and saying that he hoped that she would have a good time here. The words shocked Rustica so much that as soon as everything went away, she depicted on her face not only shock, but also despair, because this is not only the real Hayden, but also the one who makes fun of her. After a few minutes, she already went outside to go down the beautiful staircase with Eldwin, who was waiting for her near the carriage all this time, so that after the reception he could go to another destination. The guy was already standing near the door of the carriage to open it as soon as possible, before asking the lady how everything went, and to which Rustica replied that everything was fine, and the situation remained formal. The girl wanted to quickly get into the carriage, but when she heard the knight's exaggerated words of concern for her, she looked in his direction in confusion, not understanding what was wrong with him and whether he was telling the truth. Lady decided not to be silent and asked the suspicious guy sitting across from her, when exactly he found out that she was going to another empire, if he himself volunteered to go with her as an escort. Eldvin, who was still acting out, put his hand to his chin and said that he had learned about her sending about a week ago. And after 2 days, he had volunteered to go with her after 2 days of thinking, because he is a good friend. But the heroine herself looked at her old friend with disdain, realizing that in fact he did not have the authority to know this, so he could learn about it from his executor father, which means that her dispatch was planned even earlier. Putting her head on her crossed arms, the girl also imagined the insidious Hayden, who appeared exactly 4 days ago in an unknown city. But he needed her. Her face and hands seemed to turn pale, and everything around reddened when the heroine assumed that the Emperor himself was spying on her. But then she did not understand why it was necessary to make so much noise. Soon Eldvin himself noticed changes in the main heroine's mood, so he looked at her and asked what she was staring at, and whether she was unhappy with her arrival. But Rustica answered coldly. Almost bending down, she told her friend to be quiet, because now she is thinking about something important. After which she continued to sit in the carriage with a sullen face, thinking about Hayden. After some time, an important guess, she still decided to distract herself from the excitement and calm down, looking out the window with an indifferent look, and asked Eldwin where they were going. The guy just crossed his arms and looked towards the window with his forehead, positively telling his girlfriend that since they have already done their business for today, they will now go to the Caleta embassy, where they will stay for a while. When the carriage with the main character arrived at its destination, the black horses stopped galloping, stopping on the side of the road, where there were beautiful, modest buildings, tall trees, and neat bushes. The couple got out of the transport and found themselves right next to the embassy, a huge house, the gates of which were already open for them, which made Rustica look at him with surprise, not even imagining that they would be treated so well, while Eldwin stood behind her and smiled. Without delay, the main character immediately ordered her partner to follow her, and Eldvin was already going to do it. Before that, he asked Rustica what they were going to do now. The main heroine's personal bodyguard was behind her and was about to catch up with the lady, when she resolutely headed forward to the house itself in order to see it from the inside as soon as possible. Filled with determination and motivation, the girl answered the boy with a sly smile, saying that she had not yet come up with activities for them, but in her head she was jokingly preparing to spread the rumor that the emperor was bad in bed. When she had already settled in a new place, she decided to untangle her long brown hair, which had previously been tightly braided into braids, preventing her from relaxing and causing discomfort. She looked at herself and her figure in the mirror, noticing herself in simple clothes without fancy elements. And therefore, being already in a simple image, she told herself that now she could relax. The heroine remembers that as soon as they arrived at the embassy, a lot of business fell on her, because of which the entire delegation of Caleta gathered in a circle to discuss everything most important, which is why Rustica's head hurt. The girl thought that the embassy for her and her friends turned out to be much better and more comfortable than she thought, when she remembered that a couple of hours ago she went to the second floor and ordered Eldvina to deal with everything. When all matters were settled, Rustica finally allowed herself to sit down in an armchair, leaning back and with a heavy sigh enjoying the silence after incredible adventures and travels. Tilting her head back, the girl with closed eyes began to say to herself that she had already made a to-do list and also received the necessary documents. And now she had to get money. She nervously and indignantly jerked her legs when she realized that she was a knight, and it was not her nature to be some diplomat who also had to learn the exchange rate in order to make a profit. Standing up sharply, she suddenly became serious, speaking to herself with a stern look, saying that if she had seriously thought so, she would never have come here. So she must try. Clenching her palm into a fist, the lady announced to herself that now she will not allow herself to be idle, since she spent 4 whole years on this, and therefore now she only needs to work hard. But no matter how strong the young heroine's motivation was, when she went out to do all the work she thought about, she only put her hands on the fence and realized with sadness that nothing would work out. The girl mournfully laid her head on the low fence, talking to herself that it was not easy to interact with people after a long hermitage, but suddenly a man called her. Raising his head next to him, the lady saw a blonde man in expensive clothes who looked at her and waved his hand, as if he wanted to meet or say something. He pointed to the house next door. The cute blonde told Rustica that he was her neighbor and also asked if they had recently come here, to which the diplomat replied with a smile that it was all right. After that, the nameless blonde pointed the girl to the second house, saying that he himself moved here 4 years ago, and he himself comes from a neighboring country called Nerva. The words of the little-known neighbor surprised the main character, so she began to look at him with genuine curiosity, thinking that in fact Presia is called an empire because they have many neighboring countries. The blonde didn't want to fall behind Rustinka, so in the next moment he pointed to another building nearby, telling her that this was the embassy of Soldstein's country, because the entire street was reserved for ambassadors and diplomats. After that, the guy put his hand to his chin and thoughtfully asked the little-known, green-eyed girl if this meant that they were in Presi for the first time, to which the heroine answered positively. But as soon as the blonde asked the lady if she had already managed to exchange their currency for the local one, the brown-haired beauty panicked, said that she was just going to do it, but didn't get around to it. After showing his index finger to the surprised heroine, the unknown blonde told Rustica that they were lucky to meet because he was doing just that. But there was no currency of her country in Presi yet. He pulled out a business card from under his jacket and handed it to the main character, where his name was written. Or rather, Count Felix Keika, and he also said to contact him if there were any questions about this topic. Assuming that the mysterious but very charismatic blonde is the owner of the bank, the lady took the business card and looked at how her new acquaintance was already leaving her, waving his hand in farewell. Rustica could only look at the bill that the ambassador of another country had just given her, thinking that he was an ambassador, not a banker, and that he would not be hindered from making his own business cards. Realizing that now even more worries fell on her, the main character decided without wasting time to turn towards the house and shout Eldvin's name in order to start completing all the tasks as soon as possible. After some time, when all the money-related work was done, Eldvin and Rustica lay down tiredly on the bench when a dark cloud of impotence seemed to be blowing over them, but they still managed to get enough money. With a tired face, Rustica told her friend that she didn't even think that the banker would steal so much gold from them, to which Eldvin replied that if their emperor found out about it, he would surely be angry. Standing up from the bench and holding his knees, the lady also said that it seems that everyone in this place will consider them enemies, only because they came from behind the wall, and the knight agreed with her words. Putting his hand to his chin, the pensive heroine said that she was still glad that money could be exchanged here, and Eldvin, holding up bags of coins, muttered that he was glad that they had done it at all, and now they would not have big problems with money. Putting her hands on her waist, Rustica suggested the cheerful guy to go to the market, and he immediately agreed, pointing his finger in the other direction and saying that there was a queue of some kind near an unknown store. A few minutes later, the protagonist of the story was able to get to the same counter, near which there were many people and a section where Eldwin was. But she did not understand what caused such a stir. Realizing that her friend would most likely be standing in line for a very long time, she looked to the side and noticed a newspaper stall nearby, which she wanted to go to pass the time. She leaned a little towards the newspapers, asking the seller if these were new editions, and he looked at her and answered that they were certainly the latest, after which he asked if she had come from some village. The brown-haired girl in the blue suit did not answer the seller because she was too engrossed in the newspapers she was looking at, thinking that they were completely different and also official, praising the emperor. After reading one of them, or more precisely its title, the girl learned that in the publications they constantly write about the fact that Emperor Caleta is allegedly cunning and treacherous, and the empire itself is called a nation of thieves and weaklings. I took such a newspaper in my hands. The girl said that Caleta is literally being attacked here, so she should buy it. But suddenly a man standing next to her argued with her. What kind of third-grade edition did she take? The girl did not pay attention to him, only running her finger through the newspapers, when the stranger told her that, however, the newspaper was normal, and the other praised the aristocrats too much and hated him with all his heart. Unable to stand it, the main character turned her head towards the brunette, apologizing before telling him why he had the right to tell her what to buy and how to behave. But Rustica did not finish because she was in shock, because right next to her was the Emperor of Prisia himself, who specially leaned towards her face in order not only to surprise, but also to frighten the unfortunate woman. Hayden continued to smile sweetly as the lady pretended not to be upset or surprised as she pointed a finger at the clerk at each newspaper, asking him to pick up one of each for her. Crossing his arms, the tall and big brunette with a smirk asked the main character if she pretended not to know him. That what the indignant lady said, they say it is, because it is correct. When the guy asked her if it didn't hurt her, because she herself had asked him about it, Rustica remembered that she had told him in the forest never to pretend they knew each other again. Therefore, a man with white eyes and a sly smile asked the shy protagonist if he would continue to pretend that he did not know her even when they would see each other very often at work. Rustica only looked at the emperor with contempt, pursed her lips, and remembered that in her empire he was completely second, and now she is making a cool guy out of herself and makes fun of him on every occasion. When she was distracted by the seller, who had already made her order, the girl only smiled playfully and politely, already taking coins out of the bag and asking how much she got. As soon as the girls handed the newsboy the payment for the editions, Rustica immediately moved away from the counter, and Hayden himself, staring straight ahead with a stony face because she did not want to see him. But she did not even suspect that the emperor in a dark coat was constantly following her when she herself was looking for her friend in the store, who should have left it long ago and was standing on the street. But now she does not see him among the crowd of different people. Hayden drew attention to the stall, which had a lot of visitors, looked in his direction and said that everyone who goes there seems to be losing their minds. But the angry Rustica did not like the emperor's presence. However, Hayden himself turned out to be as smiling as before, because he looked at Rustica with joy, asked if she could give him at least a small part of her time. The girl understood that she couldn't get anywhere from the obsessive guy, so in the next moment they were walking along the street where beautiful brown houses with pointed roofs stood. The main character, holding a newspaper in her hands, walked along the road accompanied by the emperor, telling him that it seems that he likes silence, to which he replied that he was, and to which the lady immediately asked why he was here. The couple continued to walk along the busy street when the smiling and sly Hayden looked at the girl and answered that he wanted to talk to the ambassador personally and touch on more important topics. He still wanted to annoy the lady, so he once again looked at her with sly eyes and said that he was very glad to meet them, even though the heroine wished that she would never come again. An outraged brown-haired woman with newspapers in her hands looked at the emperor and asked if he wasn't the first to pretend that he knew her, but he only leaned closer to her, asking if she remembered something. It was as if it became dark and incomprehensible around her when she continued to look at her friend and did not understand why he was talking to her with ramblings, incomprehensible questions, and some riddles. But Hayden changed the topics of conversation very quickly. So in the next moment, he pointed his finger up and, remembering the suspicious guy, asked if he was her friend, to which the heroine said that he was. Angry at the young owner, the lady told the brunette that this was her friend named Eldwin, But when Hayden warned that he might be dangerous, she only got angry, said that it was none of his business at all. But Hayden said that he still cares about this, because he imagined Eldvin with a long sword, told Rustica that he is a murderer who is ready to draw his sword and kill anyone for his emperor. The brunette also remembered the mysterious lady with a long tail, imagined her in a dark alley, and warned the main character that she is also supposedly called a colleague, but she is the personal killer of her master Carlos. Hayden also did not forget to mention the main character's servant, the mysterious Matin, introduced him in a dark room and told Rustica that he knows poisons and their preparation very well. The girl with the newspapers in her hands already felt around her as if there were many eyes that were watching her, because the Emperor of Prisia himself warned her that there were only enemies and murderers around her. She lowered her pale head with a sad look, telling Hayden that such accusations were too much for her to hear. But in fact, she thought that he had conducted a very thorough investigation. Suddenly, she stopped, and as her long hair was blown by a light wind, she looked at the serious Hayden and asked what this was all about and why he was telling her this.